По долги 13 години граѓанска војна, режимот на Башар al-Assad падна, речиси, без борба. Тој избега во Москва, а власта ја презеде опозицијската бунтовничка група Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Што тоа ќе значи за иднината на Сирија, но и што тоа ќе значи за остатокот од светот? Добре дојдовте во уште еден лавиринт, јас сум Кристина Атовска. Секако оваа епизода ќе биде посветена на Сирија, односно на изненадувањето кое се случи таму по 13 долги борби, поречиси половина век владење на семејството Асад. Конечно Башар al-Assad ја изгуби власта и во моментов се наоѓа во Русија, каде веќе добил азил тој и неговото семејство. Власта ја презема ХТС, бунтовничката група, која во минатото имаше блиски односи со ал-Qaeda, односно беа практично под еден ист чадор, а сега тврдат дека тоа повеќе не е случај, дека ги прекинале сите врски со другите терористички групи. Светот, односно Западот, се уште ја смета оваа група за терористичка, но според очекувањата можно е ова да се промени во брзо време со оглед на фактот колкав број противници имаше председателот поранешниот председател Башар al-Assad, кој практично и без борба се откажа и напушти Сирија, кога бунтовничките сили на ХТС тргна прво го освоја Алепо, а потоа тргна кон Сирија и само кон Дамаск и за неколку дена го презема и главниот град. На самиот почеток се чини дека нивните акции се прилично мирни, дека сакаат мирна транзиција на власта, но со оглед на нивното минато голем дел од луѓето се скептици. Но во меѓувреме огромен број Сирии се враќаат назад во своите домови и во својата држава. Оваа група која презеде власта направи практично една генерална амнестија на војниците од претходната војска која држеше Башар al-Assad и ги ослободија голем дел од затворениците. Што тоа ќе значи за остатокот од светот, ќе видиме и во наредните денови кога ќе се смири ситуацијата. Но сега на оваа тема разговараме со колегата Bud Wichers од Холандија, кој има огромно искуство во војното известување, а особено во овој регион, во Сирија. Тој веќе 9 години, од 2011 до 2019 година активно известувал од Сирија, посетил повеќе сиријски градови, имал контакт со поголем дел од овие фракции кои управува или кои се бореа во Сирија во изминатите години. Одиме во Холандија и каде разговараме со колегата Bud Wichers. Bud Wichers, thank you very much for accepting this interview. I called you because you're a very, very experienced war reporter. I had the privilege to go to the front lines in Ukraine together with you, and thank you for that, and thank you for joining my show today. I asked you to join me because your huge experience in the Middle East region, especially in Syria, which is facing a huge historical moment these days. You are reporting from Syria since the beginning of the uprising in 2011, and the last time you visited Syria was 2019. So first of all, I have to ask, what do you expect of this group, HTS, who is currently ruling the country?
First of all, thank you very much for having me, Christina. And of course, we went to the front lines ourselves, and I think you're a very brave journalist. What I think for the future of Syria, it is going to be very complicated. It has been for the last couple of years. It's going to be even more complicated now with HTS. in power, how will it turn out, and what exactly do they want?
They said that they want peaceful transition of power. They even voted for some amnesty for all the soldiers from the Bashar al-Assad regime who are willing to surrender. And everything looks like this time what they do is very different, and of course the suspicions that are here are based on their beginnings in Syria with al-Nusra Front, who was also a part of al-Qaeda group. And nowadays all they're saying is they broke all the ties with al-Qaeda, and in previous years they even fought with each other.
Yes, that's correct. The leader of the group started with Al Qaeda, and then he went to the Nusra Front, which in Europe or in a lot of countries they are deemed to be terrorist. Especially a lot of young people from Europe were there in 2011, 2012 that joined the Nusra Front, and they were deemed to be terrorists because they also fought with ISIS. It is very likely that in the end, the Islamic part of the group will show, but for now they are really having like a moderate conversation with the old leaders.
So here, their leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, he went to an interview on CNN, and when he was asked what is the difference now and the difference with 2011, he said that they're much better organized this time, and they cut the ties with the terrorist group, and this uprising and this it's not actually an uprising, they just took the power very peacefully, if I may say so. All of this is because this group HTS now is well organized. What is your opinion about their capacity to build institutions, governmental institution, not just a military organization?
Well, you have to understand that the group got like the first glimmer of publicity was already in 2011, and then they were basically called the Free Syrian Army, or they were part of the Free Syrian Army. They all wanted to overthrow the Assad regime back then. What happened was that there were also the extreme elements, which is ISIS, which is Nusra, which is Al Qaeda, that joined them, but also like the more moderate groups, and they were all calling themselves the Free Syrian Army. So in a way, they already have like over a decade experience in organizing themselves, because even though the uprising stopped at some point, they were still, especially in Idlib, were regrouping and were making new plans to overthrow the government, and that was happening last week.
And what do you think is the reason that Assad actually quit I can say quit the throne so easily without fight, basically this time? And what's happening at the moment is there is also some bombardment in Syria. Israel is fighting what's left of Hezbollah there, and United States are bombarding ISIS spots. So what do you think it will happen? Will HTS have somehow a clear road for their governance?
I think they actually do, but we have to also look at the point, why are they doing it now? What happened that uh, actually didn't happen for the last 10, 15 years? And obviously, I think the root of the uprising in Syria was the war in Gaza and the war in Lebanon. Uh, it was very, very hard for the people from Hezbollah to actually, they suffered huge losses. And Hezbollah was always a firm uh, supporter of the Assad regime, also in the beginning of the Arab Spring in 2011. they had so many losses that they didn't actually have the capability to help the Assad regime, and that made it incredibly difficult. And obviously, you have also heard the rumors that Turkey has supporting this group by giving them weapons, by giving them training, or at least were in favor of the group. And you also saw that in 2019 when HTS already was there, had a strong presence uh, already also in the parts near the Kurdish areas, and they made it the Kurdish soldiers very difficult back then. So it's not like they're just coming and saying, "Well, here we are." It was definitely a lot of planning ahead. They have the experience, they have the people, and they obviously know what they were doing when they were marching to Damascus. And what is a very interesting fact is, and that's what I've verified on several videos, is that there are also a lot of Ukrainian fighters right now fighting for HTS, and they had like the capabilities of the drones, because obviously in the war in Ukraine they're using a lot of drones, and that's something that HTS, like the old HTS, like never had many drones, and you have a lot of very experiences drones operators in Ukraine. So we saw also pictures and footage of Ukrainian drone operators helping HTS to further the road to Damascus.
Yes, maybe they have their interest there because Russia is a long supporter of Bashar al-Assad, and the latest information said that he is already in Moscow with his family and already got asylum. So, were you expected something like this?
Yes, I mean that's the most obvious choice for him. But I expect not for the Russians to just really show pictures of him right now. I think there will be a lot of briefings that he first has to undergo with intelligence services over there, because he still has a lot of ties in Syria, and everything has to be like he has a lot of intelligence, and the Russians obviously want to have that intelligence, and they also want to have knowledge of the people that they can trust within the new government, because like France and Germany already said, we want to work with HTS, we want to work with them. uh, in the end, also the Russians has to have to work with them, and they have obviously the upper hand because they know all the moving pieces, and they will have that information and then obviously act on it.
So, but I want to talk a little bit about your experience in Syria starting in 2011 at the beginning of the uprising. So, what was the situation then, and can you believe when you see now what is happening at the moment there, that comparison for, I mean, it's been a long time, it's more than a decade of war. So from what I saw, the Syrians, they still, some of them, they still can't believe this is happening. So what was your feeling and the feeling when you first time visited Syria?
Well, it was Sunday. It was like unbelievable, and I even got a little bit emotional. I still have some friends in Syria. They were over the moon. Also, like some people that were very concerned, as you can imagine. First time that I went to Syria was in 2011. Before that, there were the uprisings in Libya, and there were the uprisings in Egypt. I was there as well, and then I went to Syria, and it was a total different story, because in Egypt we saw that Mubarak at that time was very well rem- quickly removed from power, and then Gaddafi was also very quickly removed from power during the first months in the Arab Spring. And then Syria became a totally different story, because then you had like a real army that was fighting and supporting Assad, and you had the Russians that were helping basically Assad as well as the Iranians. So that was a totally different story. And then in 2013, there was obviously the very big fight in the biggest clash, I think, still in the war in Syria. That was in Aleppo. Many people lost their lives and had to leave their house and all their belongings. And I was there at the moment, and it was constantly pounding of bombs from the air. It was constantly people were very very scared, and there was at one point there was a little bit hope that the then rebels Free Syrian Army would actually succeed, but it was very also very it was also quickly dispersed the hope. And now people are just over the moon. And I had also a friend who had a brother in this Shetnaya, the famous torture prison. Uh, and I heard stories about that, and I heard stories from other people that were there, and it was just a horrible regime for some groups in the in this in Syria.
And but let's explain a little bit the situation and all the fractions in Syria and in context of where you went. You mentioned Aleppo a few times. That was the city where this all of this started now, and it was also the city which was under heavy fights and heavy bombardment back in the years since 2011. It was completely destroyed, and we know because Aleppo has a lot of historical heritage that was also destroyed in all of those fights. Just I want to hear your experience with meeting all of these different groups. For example, when you was there, most of the territory was controlled by Assad forces, and he had help from Russia and Iran, but out there is also ISIS group, al-Qaeda or al-Nusra, then the Kurdish, and they're all supported by different countries and different parties. And they usually fight between each other, all of them. So I want to hear your experience with communicating and facing with all of those groups, and of course how dangerous it was to work with them or to cooperate, because when a territory is controlled by one group, you need permissions and accreditations from the exact group to be able to operate as journalists in that region.
Yes, in the beginning it was different because all the groups were working together to remove Assad from power. And I still remember that the moderate groups were working with ISIS or Nusra because they had one common goal. And what I remember is that they all had like bands around their arms to say what groups they are, and then it was like a mix of bands. One was like a very moderate group, one was Jabhat al-Nusra, one was were the Kurdish soldiers. But after a couple of years or a year, everything changed and everyone was actually fighting for themselves. And I remember that we had a special press pass because we had to go in some areas where there were like people that were more conservative that were deemed by the West as terrorists. And they had like their own like press pass that you had to obtain before you could enter that area. And then obviously you had the regime that was on the other side. You also had to go through their channels if you wanted to go make photos or talk to people on that side. And that was like the most difficult thing to do. The last couple of times that I was there, I also spent a lot of time with the Kurdish soldiers. And then you're talking about the YPG, you're talking about the SDF, that they were very much involved in the conflict, and they are still are because after all the people that were deemed to be terrorists were taken in or were arrested. They were taken to the Kurdish areas where the Americans and the European countries had jails where they were putting them. So that also changed the dynamic. There was a lot of funding to the Kurdish cause from the Americans to help basically get rid of the extreme elements where they were very afraid.
Those are the Syrian democratic forces we're talking about. And did you face violence with any of this group? How they treat journalists?
Well, unfortunately, there are a lot of journalists killed in the last 10 years, and I think most famous one is obviously Marie Colvin and Raymond Utschek. They were killed in homes after a broadcast. Their building was directly targeted by the Assad regime. Um, and you had, of course, the gruesome beheadings of journalists by ISIS in Syria. Uh, that is something we as journalists never forget, because we all saw the uncensored videos that were put out. And then obviously you had Raqqa, the headquarters at one point from ISIS, and everyone was terrified of going there, and because it was basically one big slaughterhouse. After ISIS was gone, I went there and I was in the prisons that were used by ISIS, in the torture rooms and the tunnels that were digged under under the city. And for the regular people, it must have been hell living there during that time.
How did they let you go inside? It was with their permission?
It was at that point. It was with the permission with the Kurdish soldiers, because they were ISIS was driven out by the coalition forces, and then they tried to remove the last pockets from the city, which is at this point still an unstable city because of the fact that there are still sleeper cells uh, around in that area. So if you go, if people go there, there's still like a lot of fear of very extreme elements. Uh, and now with all the prisons that basically uh, were are open now, and people that were let out, there's still like a serious uh, security breach, and I think a lot of countries are very afraid of that. And what will the people that they said were terrorists, what will they do in the next couple of months? Will they go back to Europe? Will they plan something, or will they stay in their own country? Will they terrorize their own people? That we don't know.
What's your assessment about prisoners' liberation? So I'm interested in those prisons you mentioned with ISIS fighters. Are they still closed? And what about assessment of the other prisons? Because we saw a lot of prisoners went out freely. Some of them are politically imprisoned by Assad regime, but some of them might be connected with terrorist groups. So what will happen now with all of those people out without knowing who is who?
Well, most ISIS prisoners are still in the Kurdish region. They have several prisons where they, among others, help. Are having female prisoners that were like ISIS brides. There are a lot of them are from Europe, but you also have like in Hasaka, for example, you have a prison that is more. A lot of men are there, so they are still in there. But we don't know if HCS are going to free them, or if there is a possibility for them to get out. What we already see right now is that HCS is trying to take For example, there are heavy fights right now near the place of Manbij, which was previously controlled by the Kurdish people, but already HTS is trying to move around pieces for them to take.
And I want to ask you about the refugees, because we mentioned all of those people who go to Europe, and now in these last few days we saw columns of people from the Syria surrounding neighboring countries coming back to Syria. That's something we really haven't seen in so long time, and a lot of people, millions of people were displaced, and they tried to flee the country and to get to Europe. Most of them stayed, as I said, in the neighboring country, but we also remember the huge refugee wave back in 2015. So what do you expect now when it's in European context, from European continent? Will all the Syrian refugees go back now when Assad is out, or you think that all of the people who managed to get to Europe will stay in Europe?
Well, it depends really on the country that you're in. For example, as you know, almost 3 million people, 3 million refugees are in Turkey. And Erdogan already said, you are free to leave, go back to your own country, to Syria, but you cannot come back to Turkey again. And with the situation so unstable, a lot of people are still thinking about going or going not, because if it's going to be a Libya situation in a couple of months where all the groups are fighting each other again, then they probably are better off in Turkey. The Lebanese don't say that to their refugees. They just allow them or small pockets to get in. And for the rest, like people from example from the Netherlands, they can go, and if they want, they can come back to the Netherlands if they after they see their houses or see their family. But especially the refugees from Turkey are very hesitant because they don't want to be in a situation that in a couple of months HTS is not delivering all the promises that they are saying that they're now going to keep. And if there is a lot of fighting again, and that is basically what a lot of people are scared for, that it ends up like something like Libya or something like Iraq, where you have so many fractions. Because you have to understand that HTS is, yes, it is a group, but there are also a lot of subdivisions or subgroups within that group. It's like an umbrella organizations of a lot of organizations right now. We have to see how that plays out. I personally saw also a lot of videos in the last couple of weeks uh, that are very questionable, and we have to see how HTS eventually is treating all the people that used to be, for example, in the army of Assad. And you already said, well, they will probably pardon all the people that were in the army. You have to understand that all the people that were in the, or most of the people that were in the army were actually forced to go into the army. It's like a mandatory army procedure. And then we're talking about maybe 100,000, if not more, soldiers and young men that are mandatory in the army. And you cannot expect them to go on, everyone to be on trial, and they shouldn't have to.
Yes, that's a big plus in the eyes of the Syrian people for the new leadership. This situation and their first actions since they came to power. And but I want to ask you, because we mentioned it at the beginning, that most of the Western world considers HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham terrorist organizations, and they still acknowledge their terrorist ties with some group. So do you think that situation will change now after these events, and especially after their actions since they got to Damascus and they got Assad to flee the country?
Well, it really depends on what what their political strategy is, because as we remember in Afghanistan, the Taliban also said that they would be very moderate, and they would all the things that they did in the future wouldn't happen again. And look where we are, like a few years later. And it's not that I'm saying HCS is going to do that. I mean, I have every hope that they're gonna abide by all the things that they are saying right now. And we have just to be very careful of the extreme elements not taking over, or basically hijacking that group. And I think that is like the biggest fear. But like with it, if we can draw again uh, uh, if we can look at the Taliban, for example, they did a lot of moderate things to get all the assets and all the bank accounts unfreezed. So they had like more money to spend. And I think HTS has every intention to make a working government. And for that, they need a lot of money, not only from Syria itself, but from around the world. And then because of all the assets and all the restriction when it comes to money, uh, th- they hope that they're going to be lifted uh, once they have proven themselves as to be a moderate government, or
So
leadership at least.
we're gonna have to see how the things will turn out in the next few days, and how this new group HTS will hold the power in Syria, and what that will mean for Syrian people. And one more thing I want to ask, because it is main topic in the media since the beginning of the Syrian war, since 2011, and that is chemical weapons. We know that the Bashar al-Assad regime was using chemical weapons on Syrian territory. There was some international efforts to put an end on it, and a few years later it turned out that he still has some chemical weapons and he's still willing to use it. Nowadays, for example, yesterday, Israel army said that they are targeting what's left of the facilities where he keeps chemical weapons. So, do you have any knowledge of the chemical weapons on Syrian territory, and have you ever faced something like this? What are the groups you've been with? Talk about chemical weapons and using of chemical weapons. So the people, do they know where they are? I mean, the chemical weapons, where they keep the chemical weapons.
I think they do know. Obviously, not everyone, but the high generals know where the chemical weapons are. That's, as you mentioned, Israel is really trying to get rid of all the elements of chemical, of what they still have. The latest is, as we speak right now, Israeli tanks are around 10 to 20 kilometers from Damascus. What they're going to do in the next couple of hours or days, we don't know yet. But clearly, they want to get rid of everyone or everything that has to do with all those chemical weapons.
And what's your assessment on current security situation with the chemical weapons? Can this weapon fall in the hands of someone who is of some of the groups willing to use it?
As you mentioned, there are still a lot of weapons, not only chemical weapons, but also a lot of other weapons, because Assad had a really strong army. And basically, uh, they're going to, some of them or a lot of them are going to be on the open market. And even, but I also think that criminal organization will benefit from that situation. And you can basically compare this to after the Cold War ended, uh, Russia had still a lot of weapons and they were not needed anymore. So uh, there were a lot of corrupt generals or people in the army that were selling those weapons uh, to other countries, but also to criminal organizations. And there is a serious risk that something like this will happen again in Syria. And that was also one of the biggest complaints from the Syrian people, that it was a very uh, corrupt regime and that people try to benefit from the suffering of other people. And I can very much imagine that uh, other organizations would like to have their hands on very specialized weapons that they cannot get at a normal that at a, in a normal way.
Yeah, I suppose the weapons on the black market will be a rising problem
Yes.
these days after all of this happened. And at the end, but what's your assessment in the for the future of Syria? We mentioned that we're going to have to wait for a few days to see what HTS is going to do, because you mentioned also the example with Afghanistan, that at the beginning there was hope, but right after they took power, everything went down, and now they're maybe at the worst level they ever been with human rights in the country. So, what can we expect with Syria? I mean, we're gonna wait for for this few days and then talk again. But you have a personal experience with all of these groups in Syria and with Syrian mentality. You've operated from there for so long. It's been years, like 8 years or 9 years going back to Syria. So from your experience, what is your assessment about their future now?
Well, you have to understand that yes, for a lot of people, for a lot of Syrian people, the regime of Assad was very bad. He did terrible things to the Kurds or to some minority groups in Syria. But there were also lots of groups that really benefited from his uh, power, uh, like his like the Alawites, or like other groups that really benefited from the wealth, and you those groups are going to get a very difficult period in the next couple of years, because there are a lot of people that want to revenge those old enemies. And for example, I spoke to some Kurdish people. A lot of people are very scared of what is going to happen, what is going HTS going to do to their country, or to their region, Rojava, for example. And typically, they will all say that they're very happy of Assad uh, being removed. But I also spoke to some people that were in the army, or have very strong ties to the army, and they say, "Well, we are preparing for another battle, and then it's going to be against HTS." So we really have to wait and see what the dynamics going to be in the next couple of months. Will there be a peaceful transition? I mean, in the first couple of hours after the speech of the prime minister, he said, like, we're still going to be in power, and we're still going to be uh, having a peaceful transition, but all the ministers will still be in the same position as they were before the Assad regime uh, uh, was in place. But today already we heard that there are already positions being filled by people from the HDS. So we just have to wait and see. It's going to be exciting for the people of Syria to see what their future is going to be holding. It's going to be terrifying for a lot of people. Uh, because they also just released a list of all the people that were in the Assad regime that had like a lot of power, like chiefs of intelligence agencies, but also people that were closely linked to the family of Assad, or people that were known for being who tortured people in the past. And they just released that list, and they also uh, said there will be rewards for people handing those people in. So you already see a little bit of revenge, or not revenge, or as they call justice, to and we have to see how far that takes.
Yes, we will follow the situation. I mean, we both don't sleep when there is a new war starting anywhere in the world. It's like a professional deformation for us. So we will for sure follow the situation and Syrian. But I hope we will talk again, but with good news for Syrian people and of course for the rest of the world, because we know that everything is like when something happens in one country, it goes like chain reaction, and when we see a new war, there might be additional wars coming on touching on this war or spreading around. So thank you very much for sharing your experience in my show, and we'll stay in touch and see how the situation are going. I wish your friends in Syria are all safe during these turbulent
turbulent
days.
days.
We hope so too.
Thank you very much. Може би се уште е рано за некои поголеми предвидувања, иако прашан сирискиот народ вели дека не е прерано за радување и дека прво ќе си го земат оној момент да се израдуваат што повеќе не се под авторитарна власт, а потоа ќе мислат за иднината. Судејќи според првичните постапки на новата влада практично во Сирија, можеме да очекуваме мирна транзиција на власта, но со оглед на тоа дека ова е навистина трусно и немирно подрачје кога се работи за војните конфликти, но и дека сите овие групи добиваат поддршка и се врзани со други групи, останува да видиме дали тоа ќе биде мирно примопредавање, како тие ќе ја преземат, како ќе се однесуваат, откако ќе ја преземат власта и секако дали Сирија ќе стане конечно демократска држава и ќе го стави зад себе диктаторското минато. Ви благодарам за вниманието со кое не следевте. Се гледаме повторно идната недела. Довидување.